Hello, everybody, and welcome to Pro Wrestling Inside and Out. I think Rodney got shocked that he was already on the program. Welcome.
Our heads are really big tonight.
Well, let me see if I can do something here so we're not so big here. Is that much better?
Yeah, too close to see our boogers and nose and all that. You don't want that on the internet.
One of us has got a fat head anyway.
Well, folks, this is another broadcast of Pro Wrestling Inside and Out Live. The first thing I want to talk about is there's a lot of things going on right now that people are talking about online. And one of those things is WrestleMania this year is going to be done without a crowd and at the Performance Center. Now, a lot of people are up in arms about this. They're saying, they shouldn't do it. I think I understand as being a promoter why Vince McMahon would do it. I mean, he's got this long drawn out 6 months already. He knows what he's going to do. Mitch, what do you think about the WrestleMania and no crowd this year?
I don't love it. I will be honest. I don't know what else they could do. It was difficult watching someone as good on the mic as Steve Austin sort of struggle last night. I thought he did the best he could with what he had to work with. I'm not sure what else they could do. The only thing I know they could do is try to ride it out and postpone it. But most people know, and I know you guys know because you're the son of Ron West, who's one of the best promoters in the history of the business. But most people know this, but if they postpone WrestleMania, well, number one, you've got your angles to worry about. But from a business standpoint, that puts WrestleMania into the next quarter. And they really need it to be, for business-wise, I mean, just flat out, to be honest, they need it in this quarter. So you got to think about, I'm sure Vince is thinking about money. At the same time, obviously, you don't want to take the chance on getting anybody sick, let alone regular crowd. Plus, somebody mentioned to me, well, why not, let the wrestlers' families come in and fill out the ringside seats. I forget who asked me that. But again, you hate to say it, but that would actually be against, the CDC's regulations that they're saying now, no more than 50 people gathered in one big room. Right. So, yeah. I guess they're handling it with kid gloves, no pun intended. And other than, trying to have it in May, hopefully all this will be past us pretty soon. It is kind of weird that we can all sit down and talk about the same thing worldwide. Everybody is having the same problem. Isn't that strange?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I know Rodney doesn't watch any current product.
No, I never watch it, but bottom line is that he's invested millions of dollars in WrestleMania, and it has to go on regardless of what happens. The show must go on whether you can get people in the arena or not. He's made the investment. They have to move on after WrestleMania because you're getting ready for the summer. So if they postpone it, then it's just going to delay stuff. And then they'll have to go back and even have more television, not moving ahead. But looks like this is going to be the way the business is going to be done for a while, not just for WrestleMania, but for all their TV. So it's going to change their formula, and it's just something that has to be done. And like I said, I don't think they have any choice. I don't really think they have a choice. It's going to be hard for the wrestlers. It will be hard for the wrestlers, but I think they can overcome it. I think it'll be fine. It'll be different. This will be one that everybody will remember. No doubt about that.
Well, I came up with an idea. I told my wife, I said, now listen, this is what I would do. I'd put green screens all the way around that thing. And I would invite 500 or 600 people, and I put little bitty boxes of all those people. And then I would pop all that noise right into that building. And I'd have Stone Cold Steve Austin over there, and I'd have all kinds of wrestling fans. So at least you'd have some kind of noise going on inside that building.
That would help.
So now I don't know if they even can do that, but if they could do that, that's how I'd handle
Well, it wouldn't be a bad idea because you remember when we went to watch WrestleMania at Boutwell Auditorium, I think it was the first or second one, people actually responded as if they were actually in the arena. So that wouldn't be a good idea if they can say, okay, we're going to be streaming. We're going to have the WWE members from the WWE network come in and put their faces up there, let them respond at home over it and kind of mix it in. But that would take they would have to get there early. People would have to get there early for it to mix in right with the live event. But yeah, to me, it's got to go on regardless. That date is a sure thing. It has to go.
Well, let's start now. Let's talk. There's somebody talking over there.
That's Google. They're not supposed to be listening in, but they're listening in.
She's telling you about WrestleMania. She wanted to tell you about that.
I don't remember saying, "Hey Google." I did it again.
Well, maybe she just wants to chime in and let you know something about it. All right, let's talk about what we came on here to talk about: popular wrestlers throughout the years. And I'm going to start this out because I think one of the most popular wrestlers that came up as I was growing up in the 70s and into from the 1970 to 1979, and that's the fabulous one, Jackie Fargo. There is no doubt that he was one of the most popular wrestlers, and especially, he told a story one time. My father, he said that they were going to turn him, and he told him, he said, "Listen, if you turn me, I will never turn back." And he actually never turned back ever again. But he was the most popular wrestler at that time. He had even retired, and Jerry Jarrett brought him back, and he was still as over as he was. Rodney, do you have any stories on Jackie Fargo that you could tell?
My favorite one is when he came back after the Fabulous Ones. They created the Fabulous Ones, and he was doing an interview on Memphis TV. It was pre-recorded, and basically the whole theme of the interview was heart stinks. And I mean, I bet you he said heart stinks 50 times. That's all I got to say about it. Jimmy Hart stinks. And that was classic Jackie. He was even using Jimmy Hart stinks through the entire interview. And I think he was upset because Jimmy Hart had brought in his own version of what he called it Fabulous Ones. And it was kind of a ripoff and said, I was going to show you what real Fabulous Ones look like. And he created Steve Keirn and Stan Lane. I thought that was just brilliant when he said, yeah. And it was just, and then when I think they came back, I think Jerry Lawler was standing there. He said, I got the point. Did you get the point? Heart stinks. And I'm just wondering, we weren't there at the time. I'm just wondering if when you get into the arenas, if everybody was chanting heart stinks.
Jack did you ever get to see him, Mitch?
I did, but most of what I saw was him against Jerry Lawler, kind of in his last run there before he really called it off. And then like Rodney, I saw him when he came back and reintroduced Steve Keirn and Stan Lane, and they kind of integrated him back for a little while. It seems to me like now, of course, I guess the first thing everybody thinks about if you're older than 30 is probably Hulk Hogan. But every regional promotion seemed to have its mainstay guys. And to me, since you brought up Memphis, I know, a lot of this may have been based on Bill Apter's magazines. But I didn't get to I was in the area of Alabama, in North Alabama, where I got Southeastern and Continental, but I also was blessed to receive Channel 9 out of Tupelo, Mississippi, and they carried Memphis. So I got to see, even though I'll be honest, my heart's with Continental. I like Memphis a lot, but my heart was always Southeastern Continental. But nobody could ever. I just thought it was funny that after Fargo retired and Lawler kind of took that mantle, nobody could knock Lawler off. I mean, it just seemed like that they had their guys. Dutch Mantell was actually a face up there quite a bit. We all know Dutch from Continental too, but Bill Dundee, who you interviewed last week, who was fantastic on that interview. Austin Idol, of course, who spent a lot of time in Dothan and in South Alabama and Continental Southeastern. And then later, before Memphis wrapped up, Jeff Jarrett. But Lawler, to me, I always considered him kind of one of the big three. If I look back to the heyday, to the big boom of wrestling from, like, say, 85 until about 90, well before Austin and The Rock, say that original run, 85 to 93, the three people I actually think of more than anybody else as being kind of the big three are Hulk Hogan, who was the WWF champion at the time, Ric Flair, who was the NWA champion at the time, and then after Nick Botwinkle's run, Jerry Lawler during the 88 year when he had the AWA world title and was also still in Memphis. So every region seemed to, I'll talk about that more in a minute, but every region always seemed to have its guy or guys. And boy, he was clear cut Memphis's guy after Fargo retired.
Rodney, who do you think is somebody that was most popular?
For me, I'm going to blow everybody out of the water. After this, we could probably just shut it down because I've got the most popular wrestler of all time that's ever been. This is not, and I heard Hulk Hogan. No, not Hogan. But the number one for me, he was a star before even the cable systems took over. He was everywhere he was. He was, let me see, he was deemed as the 8th wonder of the world, Andre the Giant. He was probably more traveled than the world champion. Primarily was booked by Vince McMahon Sr., and it didn't matter where he went. Andre was absolutely the most popular. He was always a special attraction. A lot of battle royals, but if you wanted a big show, you get Andre the Giant, and it's always a big show. It's a big spectacular. Whether he was against Ernie Ladd, whether he was against Abdullah the Butcher, normally you had somebody really building it up, like Stan Hansen in Georgia. He was a Georgia heavyweight champion. And I mean, he was running roughshod over everybody. And then they brought in Andre, and you said, now Stan Hansen's going to get it this time, or the superstar. Dad was telling us about a match, and I would have loved to have been there to see it with Blackjack Mulligan and Andre the Giant. And in this match, Andre the Giant actually gave a flying head scissors in that match. Now, you can imagine Andre the Giant doing a flying head scissors. He said Andre took arm drags that you've never seen. And I guess because Blackjack Mulligan was almost as tall as Andre. But for me, Andre was the pinnacle, even before cable, even before wrestling become acceptable in Hollywood. Andre was the man. He was on the $6 Million Man. He was the Bigfoot. He was Bigfoot on $6 Million Man. He was in The Princess Bride, one of my favorite movies. Yeah. So for me, Andre the Giant would be, no matter where you would go, whether in Georgia, whether you be in Japan, whether you be in Australia, everybody knows the name Andre the Giant.
All right, I want to share something with you right now. Jack had just sent this to us. He said, "My apologies, guys. Bad headache tonight. We'll rock you without me."
No.
Jack, I'm certainly hope that's not a bad sign right there. But get better.
We need to skip him some toilet paper. That's all I need to know.
You know what? We may have to drive him some.
We might have to get him some down there.
Hope you feel better, Jack.
We might have to drive him some down there. You know, while we're talking about Andre the Giant, I have to tell a quick story of Andre the Giant. We were in Georgia Championship Wrestling on Saturday mornings. They would do the television at the WTBS studios, and at that time it may not have been WTBS, it might have been WTCG, but for whatever reason the ring truck was down, and this particular day my dad was going to go pick up Andre the Giant. So here we go pulling up, and Andre comes walking out. He looks at the car, and we have a little bitty Firebird that Andre the Giant is going to get into. And I didn't think he could get in the car, to be honest with you. I just thought there's no way he's getting in this car. So he comes in, he gets in the car. His head is stuck to the, he had that big hair anyway, stuck to the top of that. And he was kind of bent over and he said, "Hey, boss." That's the only thing you could understand what he said was, "Hey, boss." And, but I mean, he was crunched in that car. I don't know. That had to be a horrible drive for him because that was a good 15 minutes away. But I just thought I'd share that story about Andre the Giant. That was That was really good. Now, one of the people, we're talking about Georgia Championship Wrestling, and I have to bring up this name because he was probably the most popular wrestler. Now, he was popular because there was a wrestler before him, and that was Mr. Wrestling. And Mr. Wrestling 2 was a very popular wrestler, but it was because of Mr. Wrestling is the reason he was that popular. Wrestling 2, I mean, the matches with Dick Slater, we talked about that on our last program. The matches with the Superstar. I mean, really, there's a bunch of people that you can just look at the people he wrestled against. But man, when he would come out, that if you never heard the chant 2, 2, 2, 2, you have never experienced anything in your life if you didn't hear that, because
That's right.
he was spectacular. Brian Bodie Green said Andre was not only known by the name, but everyone saw him knew he was special. In St. Louis, when he teamed with Dick the Bruiser, the territory went insane. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, exactly. See, I'm number one. See, I told you, number one. Speaking of wrestling too, not only was he big in Georgia, but he was super in the Mid-South. Yeah. And in fact, I do believe if it wasn't for Mr. Wrestling 2, Magnum TA would have never have seen the success that he did, because Wrestling 2 basically passed the torch from himself to Magnum TA. And
I was going to mention that. Yeah.
And after that, you would think that I think we're going to talk in detail later about Brad Armstrong's run as the North American champion. One of the reasons that Brad Armstrong's run was not quite as successful as it should have been is simply because of the way he won the title. Everybody's thought that was Magnum TA's belt. That's what we heard in the arenas. Well, he just has Magnum TA's belt. And that was Wrestling 2. That was Wrestling 2 and his passing of the torch to Magnum TA. But 2 was a tremendously gifted masked wrestler. And I was explained about masked wrestlers and why he was so good. It's because that without facial expression, you could know how Wrestling 2 felt. You could feel the emotion through his body language, no matter whether you was on the front row or on the back row. And for me, Mr. Wrestling 2 is probably the greatest masked wrestler of all time.
I agree with that.
Because of that. There was no limits to what he could do. There really was no limits to what he could do. And when he done his interview and he looked in there and says, whatever it is that he's going to tell you, you believed it. You believed it. And we were there many a times seeing 2, and he really delivered with the Superstar, with Dick Slater, the Spoiler. And then if you really want to see some classic matches, see the Midnight Express against Magnum TA and Wrestling 2 from the Sam Houston Coliseum. That's a great match. That's a great match.
Now, Mitch, do you have any other wrestlers that you looked at and you knew they were a very popular wrestler?
Well, both of you guys spent quite a bit of time in Birmingham, and somebody mentioned it last week, but that Boutwell was so much better of a wrestling arena than I started to call it the BJCC. But since we're basically all over the world with this, it's the Birmingham Jefferson Civic Center. It's where Vince McMahon used to bring, I still call it WWF back in the 80s. And he had a card there in the summer of '89 that I attended. And on top was Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage for the world title, which would have been June of '89. So it was like 2.5 months after WrestleMania 5. So Hogan actually had the belt. Savage was starting his run as the Macho King and had Sherry Martel, who was a great bump taker, out there with him. But I'm telling you, and I know, Austin had his run, and I'll definitely give you credit, Rodney, for Andre. But when Hogan came out, we didn't even have capacity in the BJCC that night. Now, it was closed. It was a lot of people there. But you would have thought Alabama came out of the tunnel. Mm-hmm. I mean, and I'm talking about the Alabama Crimson Tide. I mean, when Hogan came out, I had to motion to a friend of mine that was sitting next to me, and he was telling me, and I said, I can't hear you. And we both laughed about it after the music stopped. things kind of went down a little bit. But I would say Hogan is probably in his heyday. I guess the closest thing we've seen lately is Steve Austin. He had his late 90s run with The Rock. But one thing, I'm gonna bring this up, and I may be going way ahead, but I'm just not sure we'll ever see the likes of anything like that again. I know that their philosophy now, and they sort of rule the wrestling world. I know AEW is coming up, but after John Cena has kind of started, kind of calming it down, bringing it down, he may be the last thing we see that's anywhere near that, because their focus seems to be now on not making as big a stars, but the company is more the star. I don't know if I agree with that philosophy. I guess I understand it because they've been burned so many times by, people who got huge and then went off to make movies. But most all those guys came back. I mean, Hogan did it. Roddy Piper did it. Dwayne Johnson's doing it now. Cena is the substitute host on the Today Show. He's on every kind of movie appearance you can think of. So Cena may be that may be the last thing we see for a while. I know they're I guess their main guy, I guess you might say, is Roman Reigns, who's sort of and I bring this up to the guys around me, but I sort of feel a kinship to Roman Reigns. I'm guessing the two of you do too, simply because he's from the family, from Sika's family, from that family that were there in Pensacola, that were there, in Gulf Breeze, that came up in kind of the continental, old Gulf Coast area of the panhandle of Florida. And I sort of feel a kinship a little bit to Roman Reigns, to Continental. That's kind of strange, I guess, but since Continental's been gone a while, but I'm not really sure that we'll ever see another like Andre or like Hogan or like Austin. And I guess Cena, unless they change their philosophy, Cena may be the last big guy for a while. They kind of want to be popular across the board. But I'm not sure. I think wrestling needs big stars. I can't imagine Georgia without Wrestling 2 or Tommy Wildfire Rich. I can't really imagine Memphis without Jerry Lawler. Oregon, even though I didn't see a lot of it, I know enough to know that Roddy Piper and Billy Jack Haynes were way, way over in Oregon. Yeah. I know that Dusty Rhodes owned Florida. To me, Continental kind of had its, Southeastern had its guys, which, the Fullers, Jimmy Golden, all the Armstrongs, and then toward the end, before it changed to Continental, Austin Idol. I mean, who can forget, if you've ever seen any Southeastern from the 80s, who can forget Austin Idol being attacked at the service station? That's one of the greatest angles.
Well, now I think truly some people really wanted to attack Austin Idol.
I think you're probably right.
Austin was not the most popular person in the dressing room.
So what you're saying is the crowd really liked Austin.
Yeah, I don't think that many of the wrestlers liked Austin Idol. One of these days we'll tell some stories of Austin Idol, but we might have to do that on a channel that
you're less censoring
about what we're going to talk about Austin Idol, and there's a couple other guys we could talk about too. But
yeah, I agree.
Austin was over. There's no doubt about it. Austin had especially in that southeastern territory. Another person they came up with, he said O'Brien Green said the Von Erichs in the early mid '80s had a rival anyway.
Absolutely,
those guys were rock stars.
Rock stars, yeah, just like Hogan, rock stars.
But when we're talking about wrestlers, you brought up a guy, and that was Wildfire Tommy Rich. There was nobody any over to wrestling fans in popularity than Tommy Rich. Say whatever you want to about Tommy Rich. 1977 till about 1983, people loved Tommy Rich. I mean, he would go. There was a story. When they started going to Ohio, he was on his way to the building, and the girls and stuff tore his clothes off Charlie had to actually go. Charlie McGuire, which would take the ring and stuff. They had to go get him clothes because they had tore all his clothes off. So
I'm gonna tell you.
I mean, he was tremendously over, and he was a great wrestler. You know, I don't think people give him the credit he deserved. I mean, when Ole Anderson and Ivan Koloff cut his hair on television, that was gold. And I can remember one time Wendell Cooley got his hair cut in USA Championship Wrestling in 87, Rodney?
88, I think.
Was it 88?
Right.
He got his hair cut on there, and then he went and got a haircut afterwards. And I can remember telling Wendell, Wendell, what was the point of you getting your haircut if
I was needing a haircut?
And he said he was needing a haircut. I said, well, Tommy Rich went with gaps in it and messed up for.
Well, he had to recut it.
He'd even recut it so it would be all gapped up and everything. So, and I tried to explain it to him. He was on the way to a trip somewhere, and I said, hey, you probably need to gap up your hair so it looks like. I'm not going to do that. Well, Tommy Rich did it and made a ton of money, but there's no doubt Tommy Rich was the last big feud he had was Buzz Sawyer. And that really didn't do the business that Tommy Rich and Ole Anderson did, but Tommy Rich was definitely over, especially when he went up north. There ain't no doubt. Rodney, what's another person that you?
Well, mine, Von Erichs was going to be another one of mine, but one of our viewers took my thunder off of them because they were rock stars. But another rock star was one in the Mid-Atlantic area, and it was Ricky Steamboat. If you get a chance to see any of Ricky Steamboat's, when he comes out, that place explodes, especially when they were battling over the U.S. Heavyweight Championship with Ric Flair. And I mean, Steamboat was, like I said, he was a rock star and a tremendously gifted wrestler. He was tremendously in shape. You could see that. I think he had the Mid-Atlantic gym. And Steamboat really was outstanding. It was really outstanding. He was a star. We always try to say, well, we need to get him to come to Georgia. We need to get him to come to Georgia. They said, well, I don't think he'll ever leave the Carolinas for right now. I think he's doing just fine right where he's at. And they were doing tremendous business with him and Flair, and then later on with Steamboat and Jay Youngblood. They were, like I said, and he was a rock star. Again, if you listen to the crowd, and I saw a video not too terribly long ago, and the people were just screaming. I mean, the women were just screaming as if he was the biggest star on the planet, and for that time he was. And then and we're talking about Charlotte and Greensboro and Columbia, Charleston. I mean, the Steamboat was a rock star in the Mid-Atlantic.
No, I tell you, I was thinking the other day that when Ricky Steamboat and Jay Youngblood was the World Tag Team Champions, and I had watched the video of when Jack and Jerry Briscoe turned on Steamboat and Youngblood. That was the only two people the Briscoes could have done that to, and it would have got the response that it got. Right. Because I don't know if they'd done it to anybody else, because the Briscoes were so over in that territory. So I don't really believe that they could have done it. Mitch, you got another name for us?
I do. And it's somebody that you guys probably pretty much consider family. I'm going to tell you, I challenge, and I know, boy, I know. I've seen since I've moved out here since the early 2000s to Texas, I've kind of taken it upon myself to go back and watch World Class with the Von Erichs, especially the end of 82 and throughout 83 when it was really them and the Freebirds. But if you get on YouTube and you're not familiar with Continental, go watch the cage match where Ron Fuller and Jimmy Golden wrestle Bob Armstrong and Robert Fuller.
Yes.
And August of 85.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be a spoiler here, but it ends up being 3-on-1. And watch the crowd and how rabid they are when Brad and Scott and Steve are trying to get to the cage. Of course, Brad finally gets in and the Boutwell Auditorium goes crazy. But I sort of divide the Continental part, which, of course, is what I call home. But Continental, if you're not familiar, if you're watching this, was before Continental, it was Southeastern. Ron Fuller owned it, primarily owned it, and they elected to change the name to Continental to get rid of some of the regional name back in June of '85. And the primary stars were the Fuller family, the Armstrongs, later on, Tom Pritchard, Dirty White Boy, and those guys. But I sort of divided Continental into three periods. To me, the remainder of '85, like June until December '85 and early '86, completely, totally belonged to the Bullitt and the Armstrong family. Then as Brad left and went to Crockett in September '86 when Kevin Sullivan was coming in, some of the Armstrongs stayed around, and then I think Bob and Ron and some of the guys kind of put that mantle on Wendell Cooley, and Wendell Cooley kind of carried that throughout the rest of '86 and '87. And about the time that Wendell turned heel for a little run with the stable, Tom Pritchard was put in that spot. And I think all of those guys just did a fantastic job. And I don't know. To me, I guess when I think of the babyface, the quintessential babyface, the first person I think of is the Bullet. Because he was just, I mean, it became in our hometown, it became daily talk about was anybody going to get the Bullets mask off? I mean, it was it was every week. And let me tell you how over it was. We go to class and I'm like a junior or something around that time, sophomore or junior. And one of our teachers comes around the desk after she calls roll, sits on the front of the desk. And this is the kind of effect, I mean, your dad would love this story. But this is the kind of effect Continental had on people in Alabama at the time. She gets up, and I'm talking about this is a female teacher around, I don't know, in her 40s, gets out from the podium, walks around to the desk, sits on the front of the desk and says, okay, and we're talking a class of 30 or so people in a small town. And she said, okay, somebody tell me who's going to unmask the Bullet. And the whole class starts laughing. And we spent the first 10 minutes of the class talking about Continental.
You don't know that people realize today how popular Continental Championship Wrestling was in Alabama from even prior to Continental, the Southeastern. It was big.
It was. And at that point, you guys still had Jody Hamilton working as the Flame. You still had Boomer H. Lynch. I guess that's probably a name you hadn't heard in a while. You had Jerry Stubbs, of course, who was the turncoat as Mr. Olympia, if you remember the mask versus mask stuff, and all that. And it was like they one after another, the Bullet would beat them in the good old loser leave town matches over and over. He was cleaning house. And the
Dutch Mantel.
I was about to say that the funny meaning ironic. I don't know if something happened with the stereo system or what that night at Boutwell, but when Gordon Soley introduced and threw it to Freddie Miller, and they introduced the loser leave town between Dutch Mantel and the Bullet, and the Bullets did not play the music and came down the aisle and just sort of calmly walked down the aisle. I can remember looking at my friends, we were in the living room watching it at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night. And I remember looking at them going, oh crap, he's losing. Because there's no fat in the bone.
Hey, they didn't have the problem with the music. The problem was the guy was 93 years old. He had a hard time. So
because of that 93-year-old guy, we thought
guy to run the music there.
We thought the Bullet was losing because that guy forgot to start the music.
Started music. Well, I'm with you on the Bullet and Bob Armstrong for that matter.
They're not the same person, by the way.
Yeah, what?
I said they're not the same person.
I don't think they're the same person. No, I don't think they're the same person. But Bob Armstrong, I think, is one of the more popular people as well. Not just in Southeastern and the Continental, but anywhere he went. Yeah. One of the biggest matches I can remember way back is Bob Armstrong versus the Mongolian Stomper. And they set all of Tennessee on fire. I mean, they were filling up the auditorium in Chattanooga. This was with Nick Goulas back in the 70s. And the Stomper and Bob Armstrong, I mean, you go anywhere, Mid-South Coliseum, and it's funny. It was Jerry Lawler wasn't on the main event, but Bob Armstrong and the Mongolian Stomper was. And I mean, they were filling it up everywhere they went. And I mean, just about every time they tried it, that draw, Bob Armstrong and the Mongolian Stomper. Bob had this ability, though, to cross demographics, and not a lot of people have that. Any demographic like Bob Armstrong, and I think it's because not only was he built, but he had that gift for the microphone, that oratory skills that were second to none. I mean, he could stand up with Roddy Piper, if you remember, in Atlanta. He said, I mean, how many times did he say, I'm scared of no man, especially the man I'm looking at right now. I mean, that was brilliant. That was brilliant. But he could still toe to toe with Roddy Piper, and there are not many people who could do that. But Bob Armstrong did it. I think that's a credit to his ability and to his talent. There was, no matter where he went, he was very popular.
The Bullet was so popular when we came back in 1985 from Mid-South Wrestling. I came to him. He wasn't selling any merchandise. He wasn't selling any pictures. He wasn't selling any T-shirts. He wasn't selling anything. So me being the little businessman I was, I'd go up front, and I noticed that Brad wasn't selling any other. So I said I went to both of them. Now Rodney will say that he set this all up, but
I set this all up. I just wanted to get it all worked out for you.
But I came to him and said, "Listen, you're not selling any merchandise." I worked a deal with him. I said, "So we'll sell merchandise." We would order enough stuff on a Monday night and almost sell out of everything that we ordered on a Monday, and we'd have to scramble to get some stuff, especially if Knoxville was coming up, to just have something to sell, because I mean,
a picture, anything.
I mean, we just
that brings up a topic, and you might not remember what I'm talking about, but were either one of the two of you or both of you responsible for the Stud Buster photo? Do you remember that?
Yes.
That was Bob took it. Yeah, he took it.
For the uninformed, as Dutch Mantel would say, it was a picture of Bob, and it just simply said, I think it just said the Bullet, and at the bottom it said Stud Buster, didn't it? And
was it in a program? I think that was a program.
I think it was a program.
It was
maybe.
A program. Yeah, we did the program.
I still have the Stud Buster.
You pulled out the centerfold.
That's right. It was the centerfold.
That was.
If you look at that program that was done in Continental in 1986, you'll see similarities to Georgia Championship Wrestling's program, because we were putting it together. So we liked that program. So the program looked just like Georgia Championship Wrestling back in the 80s. But, I tell you another guy that was over big time, and this was Mid-South Wrestling, was the Junkyard Dog. Man, when that music would hit, that place would go crazy for the Junkyard Dog.
It was another One Bites the Dust, wasn't it?
Yes. Oh, man, when that would hit, and he was over there. I mean, he was a little slower by the time we got there in 84. He had slowed down a little bit, but man, the people still loved him. I mean, when he would come out there, it was not unlike listening to Hulk Hogan, as you were saying, coming out. I mean, the place was crazy for the Junkyard Dog.
Well, and he did the blind angle with Michael Hayes, that of course led to the incident with the fan bringing the gun that everybody talks about. But that's another one. If you can find it, I'm urging people who are fans that are watching this, if you find anything of JYD's run in Mid-South, look at that and look at the intensity of the fans and how things, and I'm not knocking anybody today. I know everybody, now we have the internet, and we still have, they're still ever so often they hit on an angle, but there were so many things back then. Terry Gordy slamming the cage door on Kerry Von Erich, which now you can see in a lot of different places. The one I mentioned with the Fullers and Golden turning on Bob Armstrong, the Freebird hair cream, blinding, different wrestlers, JYD being one of them. How about when this will take you back? We hadn't talked a lot about this guy, but one of my vivid memories as a teenager is Ole and Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard following Dusty Rhodes into the parking lot of the studios there in Atlanta and tying his hand to the truck and pulling the bat out, and he tells them, looks right at him and tells them to make it good. Wow.
Yeah.
That's
You'd think they'd just redone that, wouldn't you?
You think?
Was it done live though? I don't think it was done live. So
no, I think they were recording
live.
So
they were recording, and in fact, at one point, I think James Dillon, you don't see his face, but you hear him tell the cameraman, "Okay, stay with me. Don't put that camera down." Something like that. And the guy the camera goes down for just a second on the ground as they're getting out of the vehicle, and by the time they get over there with the camera, they've already got Dusty tied with his one arm tied to the truck. But I think that's one thing you talked earlier, Brent, about the things they could do to help them in the without the crowd at WrestleMania. I think they need to do some things along those lines. I don't think that would be the worst idea to don't put yourself in every setting having to have the crowd react. Do some things like you guys did. Your dad was the GM in Continental when they did the thing where the Nightmares split, and Wendell Cooley allegedly took money from the stable, and Gordon Soley had Cat Collins and a camera crew follow Wendell Cooley into the locker room to take his payoff. Do you remember that? That's and I mean, just stuff like that to me. I don't think you need that every show, but once a year or two, I think you need an angle that's just kind of off the wall to kind of draw people in.
There's a question that I'm guessing he's thinking Bob Armstrong worked Hill. Yes, he did. Yes, he did. And I think it was the end of 1983, maybe.
Right.
It could have been 84, but yes, he did, and very successful at it. He was very successful. There is a couple of videos that you can watch, and he did. He was very good at that. If you've not seen it, just look it up on YouTube, and you'll see there was no better. Bob could do it. It didn't matter either way. Now he was very hated there after he slapped Charlie Platt. So that was the turning point when people wanted to kill. Back then. Well, so when we're talking about popular, he wasn't a wrestler, but there's no doubt Gordon Soley was a very popular person, and I think he made professional wrestling, Georgia Championship Wrestling, what it was.
Yeah, I do too.
Absolutely, the man telling the story, and with credibility. And in fact, a lot of wrestling announcers patted themselves after Gordon Soley. He set the standard because at the time when Gordon was on TBS, he was the only one on national television, on the cable. So it's seen all over the place. So, yeah, I agree with you, Gordon Soley. And one of the stories with Kevin Von Erich. Kevin Von Erich first came to Georgia Championship Wrestling, and we're sitting there and we're watching. We didn't sit in the audience anymore. We were sitting back with the cameras. And Kevin Von Erich came out, and Gordon Soley introduced him, and he said, "This is from a man from a famous family, from the legendary Fritz Von Erich, his father, David Kerry Von Erich." And he said, and then he took the turn the microphone over to Kevin Von Erich, and he said, "I don't really want to talk about that. I'm here to talk about my career." And we all looked at each other and said, "Did he just smart off to Gordon Soley?" And this is him. He's trying to come in. He's trying to get over with the people of Georgia. So he was riding with us going to Columbus that night, and Dad was out of the car for whatever reason, and he said, "Well, he was talking to us." I said, "Can I make a suggestion to you?" I was talking to him. I said, "Could I make a suggestion to you? The next time Gordon Soley asks you a question, why don't you answer it?" I said, "If you think you're going to get over in Georgia by smarting off to Gordon Soley, you're sadly mistaken. You just as well to go on back to Texas, because that's not going to happen here." He said,
"Get over it," but
and I said, he said to me, he said, "The moment it came out of my mouth, I knew I made a mistake." He said, "The moment he said, and what's even worse is that Dad's going to see that later tonight, and he's going to call me about 1 a.m, and I'm going to hear about it." He said, "I'm dreading that call all this night." He said, "I knew when I said it, I shouldn't have." But it's true. And he really never really got over in Georgia.
Unfortunately, when you was on the road back then, there wasn't any cell phones. So you would always get the calls at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. If a wrestler wanted to come in, he would call you at 2 in the morning.
That's
You know,
right.
because you were on your way in, so he would call and say, "Hey, is there a spot for me?" And then this would be you do business at 2 a.m. Actually, when Andy Kaufman, when he got started and he wanted to do what he would do, it was at 2 o'clock in the morning. Bill Apter will tell the story. If you listen to his stuff, he was the one that actually facilitated that thing between Andy Kaufman and Jerry Lawler. Another person, I would say, I won't say these are a team, but if the Rock and Roll Express, Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson,
Right.
I had somebody tell me, I had done a post and they said, "Oh, that's just two preliminary guys, the middle of the card guys. They wasn't over." Man, go watch videos, my friends, because I'm telling you, these guys, when we were in Mid-South Wrestling, they were over. And then when Dusty Rhodes got a hold of them for Jim Crockett, they became bigger stars than they did Mid-South Wrestling. And in 1984, so everybody knows, that was the biggest year that Mid-South Wrestling ever had under Bill Dundee, the Rock and Roll Express, Terry Taylor, and those guys. But the Rock and Roll Express, the Midnight Express, those are the four people, and Jim Cornette. I got to give Jim Cornette the credit as well. Those were the people that took that. I mean, Jim Duggan was there at the time, but I would probably put all that to the Rock and Roll because they were over.
Definitely, again, expanding the demographics that they had. Absolutely tremendous. And if you have a Rock and Roll Express match, you know you're going to see something. They always delivered every single match. I'm with you on that one. Now, we can't leave him out. I think another one that was a star no matter where he went, and again, it was before cable, was Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream. Whether he was in Mid-South and Atlanta, against Terry Funk, against Ole Anderson, or if he was in Florida or the Carolinas, Dusty was traveling. I would say he might have been working more in Florida, but he was on the road constantly, and he wasn't even the world champion or any other champion. He was just on the card. And again, Dusty brought that interview. He could bring that little extra that was necessary. Again, making a card. Not just a good card, he makes a good card even better by having him on the card. And that interview, the skills in the interview is selling those tickets, getting those people, having that finger doing this, getting ready to go. I mean, we've seen it more than once. Dusty Rhodes on the main event, the Omni, and it was full. And whether it was against Ole and Gene or Terry Funk, that was another great one. Harley Race, we were there when Dusty Rhodes won the World Heavyweight Championship in Atlanta. So Dusty, again, was tremendous talent, and no matter where he went, I mean, it was crowds. He was popular.
And if you've not watched the Hard Times interview of Dusty Rhodes, you're missing it, baby. That's Hard Time, baby. If you hadn't heard that, you need to do yourself a service right now. And if you're watching this on YouTube, by the way, if you're watching this on YouTube, like it and subscribe to the channel. We've got a bunch of stuff coming up that you're going to be able to see. We're going to talk about Georgia Championship Wrestling in detail next Thursday. Me and Mitch are going to be talking about Continental Championship Wrestling from January 1986 until it closes. I mean, we're not going to do that all in one program, but we'll talk about January that day. But do like and subscribe to the channel, and if you're watching it on Facebook, like and share it. Because we're going to do content like this each and every week, and a couple of times, 2 or 3 times a week. We've got a lot of stuff that we're going to do in the next few months that I think everybody's going to enjoy. Now I've lost my train of thought. I was going to say something else. That's the first thing that goes is your mind, and
maybe it'll come back to you. Maybe it'll come back to you eventually. It's why that's the reason I have a pen here and I take notes and I keep up with what I'm saying.
Well, now I had my notes, but I left them in another room before I came in here. So I thought, I probably. All right, one other person I want to talk about a little bit, and I don't think we can keep him out of this because we only got a little bit more time to go, and that's Stone Cold Steve Austin. Yeah. I mean, we talked about him a little bit, but man, was this guy over? Still to this day, when he comes out on television, he is over. I mean, not in front of the nobody that's in the crowd right now, but when he would come out just a couple of months ago, oh man, I couldn't believe how over he was because I don't think he's been on TV as far as a in-ring performer. And when did he retire?
Officially, I think his last technical match was WrestleMania 19 in 2002.
Wow.
So it's been that was 2003. So it's been a while, and I guess basically we probably have some fans that could chime in on this, but if I remember correctly, neck and back issues I think got the best of Steve Austin, and he found out that he could make money different ways by coming out. If you remember, they had that run where he was the enforcer or the sheriff for a little while, and you know what? I think what made Steve Austin click with the fans is they just let Steve Williams be Steve Austin. I think Steve, and everybody knows, his real name's Steve Williams, but he couldn't be Steve Williams. He was told by Dutch Mantel, because we already had a Steve Williams. They know that story if you watch it. But I think Steve Austin was just himself. I think he was just a good old guy, a redneck guy, and people could identify with the guy that who had a boss that was a jerk, and he was rising up against the man, so to speak, and that anti-hero thing, and they still try to go back to that with the lead face against the GM all the time. But I don't think it'll ever work like it did with Austin and Vince McMahon. It was magic at that one point, and something about the way they did it. They needed each other to play off it. And I'll even go so far as to say this: back then, Vince didn't make a lot of mistakes, but I always thought turning Austin on WrestleMania 17 was maybe a misstep.
Yeah, I think so.
That was kind of the end of that magic. I wonder what would have happened if they'd have kept it going, how it would have played out.
One that is overlooked is Roughhouse Fargo, who Jackie Fargo bring in periodically to pop the territory. I've seen video where the crowd goes insane for him. Oh, yes. Oh, Roughhouse, Sonny Fargo, that refereed for Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling for a while. They brought him in 1982. I believe it was 1982. Dad was trying to get Jackie Fargo to team with Tommy Rich and Chattanooga. And Jackie, for whatever reason, wouldn't come in there. But he did get Roughhouse, and the place went nuts. But the guy would go up for people that don't know who Roughhouse Fargo is, he would go up in the crowd and walk around. He'd go get people's popcorn, sit down and eat it. And while Jackie's up there trying to wrestle, he'd go get them and put them back up on.
They couldn't let him talk on TV because he'd cuss. Yeah. Jackie said, no, you can't talk. You're going to cuss.
And the way they would do this is Jackie would get beat down, and he couldn't find a partner. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, I know where I'm going to have to go. I'm going to have to go over here to the nut house.
To the nut house.
Said, I'm going to have to go to the nut house. I'm going to have to go get Roughhouse. So he'd say, I got to get him out. I'm going to go sign him out. And Saturday night in Chattanooga, there's going to, hey, Pally, I'm going to do what I have to do, Pally. Well, Jackie Fargo, no doubt, was spectacular in what he did. There's so many other ones. There's so many other people that that we could talk about. That
one of my favorites, Thunderbolt Patterson.
Oh, yes.
Thunderbolt Patterson, one of my favorite of all time. I mean, what can you say? And I think Bill Dundee alluded to the fact that even in Australia, Thunderbolt Patterson was over. And I think he had, again, he's kind of like Bob Armstrong. He could go across demographics with no problem. Yeah. I remember being at the Omni with was the climax to the match between Ole Anderson and Thunderbolt Patterson, the Georgia TV Championship, which Thunderbolt Patterson had against the 1,000 silver dollars that Ole had. And we went for 3 or 4 months. Ole was beating everybody. He put the 1,000 silver dollars against Thunderbolt Patterson inside the cage. Place was packed. My grandmother even came from Chattanooga to watch it. We sat down. People were sitting on the steps, and like I said, Thunderbolt was a class act. I'll tell you right now. And if you ever watch him do interviews, and if anybody's with him, for whatever reason, he draws them into doing his own interview. I mean, when they brought him back, when they brought him back to WCW, and he was out there with everybody, with Sting and all the rest of them, they all tried to do the Thunderbolt interview. It was just beautiful. And it would be one of those things. He's got, what I'm going to do is I'm going to whoop your Oh, you know what I mean? I'm full. Oh, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. We knew what he was getting at. You know what I'm trying to say, Gordon. You know what I'm trying to say.
He always wanted that opportunity. That opportunity, all I need.
To whoop
and I'm gonna whoop all the Andersons. And Gordon would say, "I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
I know what you mean." The best one, I remember him with Jimmy Hart. Jimmy Hart was out there, and he told him, he threw his glasses down. He said, "I will whoop anything you got between two shoes." I thought that was great.
You know what people didn't understand when Jimmy Hart was there with it was championship wrestling from Georgia, and we'll talk about that when we get into the Georgia championship wrestling. We'll talk about that whole thing and Jim Barnett getting threw out, and we were there, so we kind of know a little bit of what happened during that. But when they did that championship wrestling from Georgia, and it was Ole Anderson and Thunderbolt Patterson against some of the worst people I think they could ever put in a tag team in life. The only good guy I think they had on that was Boris Zerkoff. He was there for a while as one of those New York assassins, but I think that he was only there for a couple of shows. But they drew sellout crowds with they get 5 minutes in the ring with Jimmy Hart because, and let's face it,
that was Albany, Georgia.
Yeah,
Albany, Georgia.
And Jimmy. And from what I'm told, that's why Jimmy Hart left there, because his payoff was bad. I think he just wanted a certain amount of money per week, and he wouldn't give it to him. And I want to be honest with you, Jimmy Hart was the one that was drawing the houses because he was different. You know, they never talking about that. They never tapped in WWF. They never tapped in to what Jimmy Hart could have done for him. I mean, they never did. The same thing happened with the Junkyard Dog. The same thing happened to Ricky Steamboat. They never tapped into what those guys could do. Because they could have done a whole lot more for them because they were such talented wrestlers and talented athletes. Is there anyone else that we're missing that we need to throw up there before we leave?
Well, none of us are from the northern part of the United States, but I guess somebody should probably mention Bruno Sammartino.
Exactly. Yes.
You talk about Hulk Hogan before Hulk Hogan, or Steve Austin before Steve Austin. His heyday predates all three of us, but from what I know and read and the clips I've seen and all the footage, Bruno was literally a household name in the United States, especially the Northeast, from about 1960, 61 throughout the 70s. I know that people when he went when they inducted him into their Hall of Fame, there was a big deal made because I guess there was a rift for a long time between Bruno and Vince McMahon. But I know that I've heard guys for decades talk about respect for Bruno Sammartino, not just, of course, but everyday life. I mean, everybody, I don't know if I've ever heard anybody say a bad word about that guy. So, I mean, not only was he over and popular with the fans and a household name, the guys that work with him that I've spoken with don't have a bad word to say about him. You can't get anybody to say a bad word about him. So I would say Bruno. A couple of other ones that I've got, I know we're running out of time very quickly. The Road Warriors, got to mention them. I had Tommy Rich. This guy was outstanding as a face or a heel, the late, great Randy Savage. Yeah. Let's see. Of course, we talked a little bit about Jerry Lawler. Roddy Piper could get you to hate him and turn around and love him within the same day. Yeah. Of course, you mentioned Rodney Ricky Steamboat, Mr. Wrestling 2. And in Mid-South, in your area up there, JYD, Jim Duggan, Dr. Death Steve Williams, and before he was the $1 Million Man, just plain old Ted DiBiase. A lot of those guys, we just don't see that kind of popularity today. I hate to be that guy that talks about the good old days, but it's just something special when some of these guys came into the arena.
People connected with those wrestlers in those days. They don't know if they connect with them as much as they did back in those days. And maybe it's the booking, maybe it's just the maybe they don't know how to do that, and maybe even the promoters of that time, you really didn't know. It was the wrestlers that knew how to get themselves over. And because I know that Dusty Rhodes, nobody told Dusty Rhodes to be Dusty Rhodes. He was Dusty Rhodes. Nobody told Wrestling 2 how to be Wrestling 2. He was Wrestling 2. So maybe that's the problem today. You've got too many people writing for them. They got that pencil, but they really don't know what the guy's going to be. Because you know what? The big star could be out there, and if everybody continuously keeps them down and they don't get to be themselves, or at least a character that they want to be, because you can't make somebody a cowboy that's not a cowboy. So maybe one day somebody out there will produce wrestling and let them be what they want to be. And you know what? If you're not any good, they get rid of you like they did in the territory days. Listen, if you didn't draw money back in the day, you were gone. You wasn't given an opportunity. If you came in, Ken Patera came into Georgia Championship Wrestling, did not draw any money in Georgia. And Jim Barnett went to Dad and said, he's got to go. He's got to go. I know he's a great guy, but he's got to go. He's not drawing no money. And they said, well, Tommy Rich is working against him. He said, yeah, but Tommy Rich did draw money for us before. So let's give Tommy Rich another chance, and let's get rid of Ken Patera. So that's the way it was back in the day. That was the territory days.
Yeah, it was just like that. I want to mention Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher from the Midwest. They were just unbelievable. The most dangerous wrestler, world's most dangerous. Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher both were outstanding. Of course, we mentioned the Von Erichs earlier in the cast, and like I said, I've been watching the Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher. That's some good stuff. If you're watching, there's a great match against Bobby Heenan managed against Ray Stevens, and Rufus R. Jones is great too. And against Ray Stevens and Nick Bockwinkel, it's just a classic match. And the people, I believe they're in the International Amphitheater in Chicago, and the people are going nuts, just nuts over the Crusher and Dick the Bruiser.
A quick story about Rufus R. Jones, and then we'll get off of here. We were in Central States Championship Wrestling the one time we ever were in Kansas City, the Kansas City territory. And they were going to do this. They were going to do this thing, and Bill Dundee was going to come out with a chair while Rick Stewart and Rufus R. Jones was doing an interview, and he was going to hit Rufus R. Jones with a chair. And Rufus R. Jones said these words to Bill Dundee. He says, "Man, when you hit me, make it look good." Well, he made it look good, all right, because when he hit him, he knocked Rufus R. Jones out. Rufus didn't take a bump; he went down and slid down like he was jelly to the floor. And I'll never forget that. And that's a sad thing about it was when it got to the production floor, for whatever reason, it got took out of the show. I still don't know why.
And Bob Geigel blamed it on Jimmy Crockett, and Jimmy Crockett blamed it on Bob Geigel, and we still don't know why it never showed. It was brilliant.
Ken Thames versus Rufus R. Jones started right. So that was probably in the Kansas City territory. And Central States Championship Wrestling. Ken Thames, a great worker. I think we met him in 1979 when he started, 1980.
Yes.
Yeah, he was always a good hand in professional wrestling, and he is sorely missed in the world of professional wrestling. All right, folks. Like we've told you before, if you've not liked and subscribed. If you're on YouTube, you're watching this, if you're on Facebook, please do so, because we got a lot of things coming up. There's going to be a lot of things we're going to do in the next few months. I think everybody's going to enjoy. Rodney, thank you so much for coming on. Mitch, thank you so much. And I guess we're going to, at this point, we're going to say goodbye until next week. And I think next week we're going to talk about the most hated wrestlers, since we talked about the most popular. And then the next week, because WrestleMania is coming up, I think we should talk about the top WrestleMania matches, the top 10 WrestleMania matches, and talk about those in length. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you next week right here on Pro Wrestling Inside and Out Live.